king and queen release thousands of lanterns into the sky in hope that one day their lost princess would return.
Then after lunch, it's puzzles and darts and baking.
Why? I can get used to working like this. Come on, hold on. Yep. Guys, I'm on a castle. We do this job.
Just teasing. So, Mother, as you know, tomorrow is a Rapunzel look. They appear every year on the market. Only on the market. Feel with them. They're meant to be. Positively perfect. Did say I love it well. Bang! Plus, I believe in chubby. I'm just saying, 'cause I love you, Mother.
All right, okay. Give me a boost, and I'll pull you up.
Give us the satchel first.
A single strand of golden hair is supposed to be something beautiful. In Tangled, it becomes a lock on a door. Rapunzel has spent almost her entire life surrounded by the same walls, looking out at a world she has never been allowed to touch. Yet the strangest part is that the thing keeping her trapped is also the thing everyone tells her makes her special. Her hair glows, it heals, it carries a power that should feel like a gift. But from the beginning, the film quietly asks a much more uncomfortable question. What happens when someone else decides that your gift belongs to them? That is our first clue. Because Tangled may look like a bright Disney fairy tale filled with comedy, music, adventure, and one extremely determined horse. But underneath all of that color is a story about ownership, about fear, about the difference between being protected and being controlled. And once you notice that tension, even the lightest moments begin to carry a little more weight. Welcome to the Film Box. This is where we do more than remember what happened in a movie. We open the compartments, we follow the little details. We connect choices that seem unrelated at first, until the machinery underneath the story starts becoming visible. Every film is a box. We open it together. And Tangled is an especially interesting box because it spends so much of its running time pretending to be simple. A lost princess, a mysterious tower, a charming thief, a magical secret, a dream waiting beyond the window. You could tell the basic shape of this story in a few sentences. Disney could have played it almost completely straight. Rescue the princess, defeat the villain, restore the kingdom, roll the credits. But that is not really what the movie chooses to do. Instead, it gives Rapunzel something far more difficult than a locked door. It gives her doubt. She wants to leave, but she has been taught to fear leaving. She wants to trust herself, but the person she trusts most has spent years making that trust work against her. She dreams about the floating lights outside her tower, yet even that dream comes wrapped in guilt. That contradiction is what makes the movie move. Rapunzel does not simply need an escape route. She needs to learn that wanting a life of her own does not make her selfish, and that makes the tower one of the most important images in the entire film. It is a prison, obviously, but it is also home. It is familiar, comfortable in places, filled with paintings, books, hobbies, routines, and everything Rapunzel has been told she needs. Nothing about it looks like a dungeon. That is exactly why it works. The strongest cages in stories are not always the ones characters know are cages. Sometimes they are the places where fear has been arranged to look like safety. And when Flynn Rider eventually enters that tower, he does not arrive as the perfect heroic answer to Rapunzel's problem. He is running from problems of his own. He lies. She distrusts him. Their first connection is messy, transactional, and ridiculous. Which matters, because Tangled is not interested in having one character simply rescue another. It gradually turns both of them into people who have to abandon the identities they have been hiding behind. Rapunzel has to discover who she is outside the story Mother Gothel created for her. Flynn has to confront who he is underneath the story he created for himself. Two characters, two invented realities, one journey that begins because each of them wants something completely different, and somewhere beyond them are thousands of lanterns rising into the night, carrying a meaning Rapunzel understands emotionally long before she understands why. That image is where our truth starts opening into something larger. Because those lights are not merely beautiful, they are a signal, a memory, a promise. And once we understand exactly what they represent, Tangled stops being only a fairy tale about a girl leaving a tower. It becomes a story about recognizing the life that fear almost convinced you not to claim. And that is where this box gets interesting. The most dangerous thing Mother Gothel gives Rapunzel is not fear. It is love with conditions attached. That distinction changes almost everything about Tangled. Gothel does not keep Rapunzel inside the tower by standing at the door every second. She creates something far more effective. She teaches Rapunzel to police herself. The outside world becomes frightening before Rapunzel has even experienced it. Independence becomes something reckless. Curiosity becomes something childish. And whenever Rapunzel starts reaching toward a life of her own, guilt quietly pulls her back. That is what makes the central conflict more interesting than a simple princess versus villain story. Rapunzel has enormous magical power hanging from her own head, but emotionally, she begins the film believing she is almost powerless. Think about that contradiction. She possesses something kingdoms would consider miraculous, yet she cannot make one ordinary decision without wondering whether she has done something wrong. And Tangled built this entire emotional engine around closing that distance. The physical journey is obvious. Rapunzel needs to leave the tower and reach the floating lights. The invisible journey is harder. She has to become capable of trusting her own perception. That is the hook hiding beneath the adventure. Because once Rapunzel finally gets outside, freedom does not instantly feel good. It feels terrifying. For a moment, she is overwhelmed with happiness. Then guilt crashes into it. Excitement becomes panic. Confidence turns into regret. She swings between feeling completely alive and believing she may have made the worst mistake of her life. The movie plays these changes for comedy, and they are genuinely funny. But underneath the jokes, something painfully believable is happening. Rapunzel has spent years being taught that independence equals danger. Walking through an open door cannot erase that lesson in one afternoon. Her body leaves the tower before her mind does. And suddenly, the entire adventure has a second meaning. Every mile she travels is not simply taking her closer to the lanterns. It is taking her farther from the version of reality Gothel built around her. That is why Flynn Rider becomes such an important counterweight. He is almost the opposite kind of prisoner. Rapunzel has been trapped by an identity someone else created for her. Flynn is trapped inside an identity he created himself. The confident thief, the effortless smile, the exaggerated charm, these things protect him. They allow him to move through life without revealing too much of the person underneath. Rapunzel hides because she has been taught the world is dangerous. Flynn performs because he has learned that being someone else feels safer than being himself. So when these two characters are forced together, the film does not merely create a romantic pairing, it puts two forms of self-deception in the same story. One character does not know who she really is. The other knows exactly who he was but would rather bury it. And the journey slowly strips both disguises away. That is why the lanterns matter so much. From Rapunzel's perspective, they begin as a mystery, something distant, something beautiful, something that appears every year at exactly the moment that has always felt personally significant to her. She cannot explain the connection, she simply feels it. And that feeling is stronger than the fear designed to keep her still. This is where our golden hair clue starts connecting to the lights in the sky. One represents the power that has been used to define Rapunzel. The other represents a truth calling her beyond that definition. She has spent her life being told what her gift means. The lanterns are the first thing that makes her wonder what her life means. And that is the question Tangled keeps opening wider. Not simply whether Rapunzel can escape, not simply whether she will discover the truth, but whether a person can recognize themselves after spending years seeing their reflection through somebody else's eyes. That is a real adventure waiting outside the tower. And before we follow Rapunzel into it, we need to look at the people who built that tower, designed as lanterns, shaped this world, and turned one of Disney's oldest development ideas into one of its defining modern animated films. Before Rapunzel ever stepped outside that tower, Tangled was carrying another kind of weight. This was Walt Disney Animation Studios' 50th animated feature. That number matters because Tangled does not behave like a movie trying to throw Disney's past away. It behaves like a movie trying to work out how that past can survive in a different cinematic language. You can feel that tension throughout the finished film. There is a princess. There is a kingdom. There is magic. There are songs, animal companions, romance, comic villains, and a fairy tale structure recognizable from generations of Disney storytelling. But the characters do not move through those ingredients with the formality you might expect from an older princess film. Rapunzel can be graceful one second and physically chaotic the next. Flynn tries to present himself like the heroic man from a storybook while the movie constantly punctures that image. Even Maximus behaves less like a decorative royal horse and more like an unstoppable investigator who happens to have coups. The old machinery is still there. The personality operating it has changed, and that makes the people behind the film especially important. Disney Animation officially credits Nathan Greno and Byron Howard as directors, with Roy Conley producing the film, which was released on November 24, 2010. Howard had already worked within Disney's modern computer animated period, while Greno came from the studio's story side. What matters on screen is the balance they help create between momentum and sincerity. Notice how quickly Tangled can move. A dangerous chase can turn into slapstick. A joke can disappear into a surprisingly vulnerable conversation. A musical sequence can advance character rather than simply stopping the plot. Then the film can slow almost completely when Rapunzel needs to process something emotionally. That flexibility is one reason the movie rarely feels trapped by the fairy tale it is adapting. The directing does not treat Rapunzel as a distant icon, it tries to make her immediate. awkward, excitable, impulsive, sometimes frightened by her own courage. And there is another crucial name behind the way she became visually recognizable. In Disney's own 2010 material for the film, legendary animator Glenn Keane was identified as Rapunzel's character designer, working alongside a broader character development and story team. That connection matters because Rapunzel's design has to solve a difficult problem. She needs to look like she belongs to the tradition of Disney heroines without feeling frozen inside that tradition. Look at how much communication happens through her physicality. Her face changes quickly. Her eyes are unusually expressive. Her movements can shift from cautious to explosive almost instantly. When she is uncertain, the animation lets her collapse inward. When curiosity takes over, her entire posture seems to open. That means the emotional journey does not depend only on dialogue. You can often tell whether the tower still has psychological control over Rapunzel simply by watching how she occupies space. Then there is the production challenge hanging behind almost every image of her. Disney described Rapunzel as having approximately 70 feet of magical golden hair. Think about what that means from an animation standpoint. The filmmakers are not merely giving their protagonist a hairstyle, they are giving her an enormous moving object that has to exist naturally inside action, comedy, emotion, and staging. The hair must trail behind her, wrap around objects, pile onto surfaces, react to movement, become useful, become inconvenient, become beautiful, and most importantly, remain readable. If it behaved like ordinary realistic hair in every frame, the screen could easily become visual noise. So the film treats it almost like a supporting performer. Sometimes it follows Rapunzel, sometimes it frames her. Sometimes it emphasizes how physically restricted her life has become, and sometimes it becomes the mechanism through which another character literally reaches her. That brings us directly back to our first clue. The filmmakers could have treated the magical hair only as a fantasy gimmick. Instead, its enormous physical presence constantly reminds us that Rapunzel's gift occupies her life whether she wants it to or not. It is impossible to hide, impossible to ignore, and for Gothel, impossible to stop exploiting. Even the technical challenge therefore reinforces the emotional one. Another production choice reveals how strongly Disney wanted personality to drive this fairy tale. Official studio material identifies Mandy Moore as Rapunzel and Zachary Levi as Flynn Rider. While Disney's description openly frames Flynn not as a traditional spotless prince but as the kingdom's wanted bandit who crashes into Rapunzel's hidden world. That casting dynamic shapes the rhythm of their relationship. Rapunzel does not sound like someone who has been waiting her whole life to deliver elegant royal speeches. There is nervous energy in her, sudden enthusiasm, moments when thoughts seem to escape before she can organize them. Flynn, meanwhile, performs confidence. The charm feels deliberate because the character wants it to feel deliberate. That difference becomes important later when the performance begins stripping away the persona and revealing Eugene underneath it. So even before the story tells us that identity is one of its central concerns, the vocal performances are already playing with constructed identity. And perhaps the most revealing production fact is simply where Tangled sits in Disney history. Its release became the beginning of a run that Disney itself later described as a stretch of major animated successes, followed by films including Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Big Hero 6, and Zootopia. That does not mean Tangled single-handedly caused everything that followed, but looking backward, you can see why it feels like a bridge. Classic fairy tale architecture on one side, a faster, more self-aware modern Disney character style on the other. And standing right in the middle is Rapunzel carrying 70 feet of something inherited while trying to determine what part of her life actually belongs to her. Put those details together, and the mechanism becomes visible. The production itself mirrors the heroine. Both are surrounded by a powerful inheritance. Neither succeeds by rejecting it completely. They succeed by discovering what they can do with it once it stops controlling every decision. Now we can finally open the next compartment and look at exactly what kind of movie those choices created. So what exactly are we opening when we open Tangled? Released in 2010, Tangled is a computer-animated musical fairy tale adventure from Walt Disney Animation Studios, directed by Nathan Gleno and Byron Howard. Mandy Moore voices Rapunzel, Zachary Levi voices Flynn Rider, and Donna Murphy gives Mother Gothel the voice that makes affection and manipulation sound dangerously close to each other. Its foundation is the classic fairy tale of Rapunzel, but Disney did not approach the material as something that needed to be preserved behind glass. Even before release, the studio described the project as a new telling of the familiar fairy tale, built around the tower, the mysterious young woman with impossibly long golden hair, adventure, humor, and romance. And that word new is important because this is not really a story about waiting for a prince to arrive. Rapunzel is already desperate to move before Flynn enters her life. She has a goal. Every year on her birthday, she sees mysterious lights floating in the distance. She does not know why they appear. She does not understand why they seem to pull at something inside her. She only knows that seeing them up close has become the dream she cannot bury. Flynn does not create that dream. He becomes the accidental vehicle that allows her to chase it. That difference changes the entire structure. The romance matters, but curiosity comes first. Freedom comes first, identity comes first. At its heart, Tangled is therefore a coming of age story disguised as a fairy tale rescue. Rapunzel's central problem is not that she needs someone strong enough to break into the tower. Flynn manages that part almost by accident. Her real problem is that the tower has followed her into the way she thinks. She has been taught a version of the world in which staying small means staying safe. So leaving the building is only the first step. The harder journey is learning whether the voice warning her to turn back is actually her own. And this is where my spoiler-free verdict begins to take shape. For me, Tangled earns its 8 out of 10 because it understands how to make a traditional Disney story feel emotionally modern without becoming embarrassed by the things that make it Disney. It still believes in songs. It still believes in romance. It still believes in enormous emotional gestures, magical imagery, comedy, villains, dreams, and happy possibilities. But it gives those familiar pieces character psychology strong enough to hold them together. The movie can be incredibly funny without mocking its own sincerity. That matters. When Rapunzel feels wonder, Tangled lets the wonder exist. When she is frightened, it does not immediately destroy the emotion with a joke. When Flynn's carefully manufactured confidence begins cracking, the movie understands that the person underneath is more interesting than the persona. And when Gothel enters the equation, the fairy tale simplicity becomes much darker than the colorful surface suggests. So who is this film for? If you love Disney animation because you want music, visual beauty, humor, adventure, and characters you can become emotionally attached to very quickly, Tangled gives you almost the complete package. If older princess stories sometimes feel too passive for you, Rapunzel may surprise you because her journey is built around choice. And if you usually dismiss animated fairy tales as stories meant only for children, pay attention to the emotional mechanism underneath Gothel's relationship with Rapunzel. Children can understand the prison. Adults may recognize the method used to keep its door closed. That is why the golden hair remains our clue. Everyone can see its magic. But Rapunzel has never been given the freedom to decide what that magic means to her. And now that the box is open, the next thing that matters is not the film's history or even its fairy tale foundation. It is the feeling of entering this world for the first time. Because before Tangled asks us to believe in floating lanterns, magical hair, or hidden royalty, it has to make one lonely tower feel like an entire universe. The first thing Tangled does well is make confinement look strangely beautiful. Rapunzel's tower is surrounded by green hills, warm sunlight, forests, flowers, and open sky. Nothing about the landscape looks hostile. If anything, the world outside appears inviting from the very beginning. And yet Rapunzel is separated from all of it. That contrast immediately creates the emotional atmosphere of the film. This is not a dark castle covered in thunderclouds. It is not an obvious nightmare. It is isolation hidden inside beauty. Then Rapunzel fills the tower with movement. She paints, she reads, she cooks, she plays games, she makes music. She finds task after task to occupy herself. The sequence is energetic, colorful, and funny, but beneath the energy there is an uncomfortable repetition. Rapunzel has become incredibly good at filling time. That is different from living. The film never needs to explain this directly, because the routine does it for us. You can feel how many times these activities must have happened before. The tower is full of creativity, but creativity has become a substitute for experience, and that makes Rapunzel immediately sympathetic. She is not sitting beside the window waiting helplessly for somebody to save her. She is active, curious, capable, almost overflowing with life. The tragedy is that all of that life has nowhere to go. That choice hooked me quickly because it changes what freedom means in the movie. Rapunzel does not want to escape because the tower is physically unbearable every second. She wants to leave because she has finally reached the point where comfort is no longer enough. And outside the window, the lanterns keep returning. That image gives the opening its first real pull. Rapunzel does not understand them, but she notices the pattern. They appear every year. They seem connected to her birthday. Something about them feels personal even though she cannot explain why. So the movie gives her curiosity before it gives her answers. That is smart. If Rapunzel already knew exactly what the lanterns represented, her journey would become a mission. Because she does not know, it becomes a longing. And longing is much more emotionally powerful. Then Mother Gothel enters the space, and the atmosphere changes without the film needing to abandon its bright visual style. This is where Tangled becomes more interesting than its premise initially suggests. Gothel does not arrive acting like a monster. She brings familiarity, sarcasm, affection, control disguised as concern. She knows exactly which emotional buttons to press because she had installed them. Rapunzel's excitement about the outside world does not meet a straightforward refusal alone. It meets a carefully constructed argument about danger and inadequacy. The world is supposedly too frightening. Rapunzel is supposedly too inexperienced. The tower is supposedly the only place where she can truly be protected. And because Rapunzel loves Gothel, those ideas carry more force than a locked door ever could. That dynamic creates tension almost immediately. You want Rapunzel to leave, but you also understand why leaving terrifies her. That is one of the reasons the first 10 minutes work so well. The movie gives us the external goal and the internal obstacle at almost the same time. Externally, Rapunzel wants to see the floating lights. Internally, she has been conditioned to believe that pursuing her own desire could be dangerous, disobedient, and selfish. Then the story introduces Flynn Rider and the rhythm changes again. Flynn enters the film with almost absurd confidence. He presents himself like he already knows what kind of story he belongs in. He is clever, fast, proud of his own image. And immediately the movie starts undermining him. That comic treatment is important because it prevents Flynn from becoming the solution to Rapunzel's story. He is not introduced as destiny walking toward the tower. He is introduced as a man running away from consequences. His path collides with hers. That collision gives the movie momentum. Until this point, Rapunzel's world has largely been vertical. Up the tower, down the tower, look through the window, stay inside. Flynn brings horizontal movement, roads, forests, distance, possibility. Suddenly, the movie feels as though it has been released from the same room Rapunzel has. And that is the strongest sensation of the opening for me, expansion. The premise promises a fairy tale adventure, but the beginning makes that adventure feel personal before it becomes spectacular. We are not waiting for Rapunzel to discover magic. She already has magic. We are waiting for her to discover choice. That distinction is why the first act becomes difficult to look away from. Every new step outside the familiar world carries excitement, but it also carries the possibility that Ghost's voice will follow her. And once Rapunzel finally crosses that boundary, the film has a new visual problem to solve. How do you photograph freedom after spending so long framing confinement? That choice opens another compartment of the box because the answer is hidden in the camera movement, color, lighting, editing, and physical design of the world itself. The visual language of Tangled changes the moment Rapunzel's world gets bigger. Inside the tower, the framing repeatedly reminds us that space is limited. Walls, windows, furniture, beams, and Rapunzel's enormous head keep creating boundaries within the image. Even when the room feels warm and colorful, the compositions make us aware that everything has an edge. There is always something containing her. That is why the exterior sequences feel so different. Once Rapunzel reaches the forest shore, the film suddenly has distance to work with. The environment stretches behind her. The sky becomes larger. Paths lead somewhere beyond the frame. Instead of looking through a window or possibility, Rapunzel can finally stand inside it. The camera responds to that freedom. Movement becomes more adventurous. Rather than keeping Rapunzel contained inside neat compositions, the virtual camera can follow characters through wider environments, move with action, swing between heights, and reveal spaces gradually. The world begins to feel discoverable. And that matters because freedom in Tangled is not explained only through dialogue, it is communicated through scale. The tower makes Rapunzel look surrounded. The outside world makes her look small. Normally, making a character smaller in the frame could suggest weakness. Here, it often suggests possibility. Rapunzel is finally standing inside something larger than the life she has been given. Color performs a similar function. The tower contains warmth, but much of that warmth feels controlled. Gold, wood, candlelight, paintings, and Rapunzel's glowing hair make the environment comfortable enough that imprisonment does not immediately look like imprisonment. Outside, the palette becomes more varied. Deep greens, blue skies, earth tones, open sunlight. Then, later, the film begins introducing stronger contrasts between natural darkness and concentrated sources of warm light. That becomes especially important around the lantern imagery. The lantern sequence works because the filmmakers do not simply fill the screen with brightness. They surround the characters with darkness first. The water becomes a dark reflective surface. The night sky creates negative space. Rapunzel and Eugene sit within a quiet visual field. Then individual points of warm light begin occupying that darkness. One becomes dozens. Dozens become hundreds. Hundreds seem to fill the entire world. The emotional effect comes from contrast. The lights feel precious because the darkness gives each one room to exist. And notice what happens to Rapunzel's magical gold in that environment. For most of the film, golden light has been associated with her hair, the thing Gothel values and controls. But the lantern scene surrounds Rapunzel with gold that does not come from her. For once, she does not have to produce the miracle, she is allowed to receive it. That visual shift quietly changes the meaning of the color. Gold stops belonging only to her magical usefulness. It becomes connected to belonging, memory, and love. Put those two details together, and our clue changes again. The same color that once marked what other people wanted from Rapunzel begins representing something she wants for herself. The animation also pays enormous attention to physical movement. Rapunzel's hair could easily have overwhelmed every composition, so the staging constantly organizes it into readable shapes. Sometimes it trails behind her like a visual line guiding your eye to the frame. Sometimes it coils around the environment. Sometimes other characters carry sections of it, turning Rapunzel's unusual physical feature into part of the choreography. And sometimes it visually connects two people. That is crucial. Her hair is not merely rendered as decoration, it creates lines between characters. It can pull, support, restrict, heal, expose. The filmmakers repeatedly turn the same object into different visual functions, which allows its meaning to evolve without the script explaining every change. Editing controls another major transformation. The comic sequences move quickly. Reaction shots arrive at exactly the moment a character's confidence collapses. Physical jokes often depend on a sharp interruption of what someone expected to happen. Flynn in particular benefits from this rhythm because his carefully maintained coolness becomes funnier whenever the editing immediately reveals how little control he actually has. But Tangled knows when to stop cutting rapidly. Its strongest emotional scenes breathe. The rhythm slows when characters become honest. The film gives faces time. It lets pauses exist. It allows a look to finish before moving on. That contrast makes vulnerability feel different from comedy even when the same characters are involved. Lighting also helps separate Gothel's influence from Rapunzel's developing independence. Gothel often enters scenes carrying a strong sense of theatrical control. Her movements, poses, expressions, and placement in the frame can feel deliberately performative because she is constantly managing how Rapunzel sees her. Rapunzel, by contrast, becomes increasingly natural once she is outside. She gets dirty. Her hair becomes part of the landscape. She moves unpredictably. She occupies spaces she has never rehearsed how to occupy. The visual texture becomes less controlled at exactly the moment her life becomes less controlled, and that is the point. The filmmaking does not present freedom as neat, it presents freedom as movement, uncertainty, scale, unexpected color, changing rhythm. Rapunzel begins in a world where almost every meaningful thing comes back to one glowing object, her hair. But as the visual world expands, more sources of light appear: sunlight, fire, reflections, lanterns, other people. The film gradually stops allowing one magical feature to dominate Rapunzel's visual identity. That is filmmaking serving character. Because by the time the lanterns fill the sky, we are no longer looking primarily at the girl with magical hair. We are looking at someone who has finally reached the thing she chose for herself. And now that the camera has shown us what freedom feels like, the story has to test whether Rapunzel can actually keep it. That test begins with a bargain between a sheltered young woman and a thief who believes he can manipulate the situation. Neither of them understands yet how completely that bargain is going to change them. The bargain that sends Rapunzel into the world begins with two people trying to use each other. Flynn neither needs somewhere to hide. Rapunzel needs someone who knows how to reach the floating lanterns. Neither of them is looking for friendship, romance, or personal transformation. Flynn sees a sheltered girl he thinks he can outsmart. Rapunzel sees an experienced traveler she can pressure into becoming her guide. That makes their arrangement useful because the relationship begins without destiny. It begins with leverage. Rapunzel has Flynn's stolen property. Flynn has knowledge of the outside world. She promises to return what he wants if he takes her to the lights and brings her home safely. Simple. Except the moment Rapunzel touches the ground outside the tower, the emotional reality becomes much more complicated than the deal. She celebrates. Then she panics. Then she celebrates again. Then guilt overwhelms her. This is one of the story's smartest early mechanisms because Gothel does not need to be physically present for her control to continue working. Rapunzel has carried the rules of the tower outside with her. Freedom therefore produces two opposite emotions at once. Joy tells her to keep going, conditioning tells her to turn around. Flynn notices that conflict and initially treats it as an opportunity. If he can make Rapunzel uncomfortable enough, perhaps she will abandon the journey and return his stolen satchel. So he takes her somewhere deliberately intimidating. This snuggly duckling looks like exactly the sort of place Gothi warned Rapunzel about. The people inside appear rough, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous. Flynn expects Rapunzel's fear to prove his point. Instead, the plan backfires. Rapunzel begins talking to them. And beneath those frightening appearances, she discovers people with dreams of their own. That scene matters because the film directly tests one of Gothel's central claims. Rapunzel has been told that the outside world is filled with threats. The first group who seem to confirm that lesson instead reveal complexity. They are not harmless because the film suddenly becomes naive about danger. They simply refuse to fit neatly into the categories Rapunzel has been given. That is the first major crack in Gothel's version of reality. Rapunzel learns something freedom will keep teaching her. Seeing the world for yourself produces information fear cannot provide. Then the consequences arrive. Flynn is being pursued because his earlier choices have created enemies and legal trouble, and Rapunzel is dragged into that momentum with him. Their escape forces her to stop being merely a passenger. She has to react, improvise, trust, use the very hair that has defined her confinement as a tool for survival. That is another important shift in our clue. Inside the tower, Rapunzel's hair belongs symbolically to Gothel's system. Its magic is the reason Rapunzel is kept hidden. Outside, Rapunzel begins deciding what to do with it. The object has not changed. Ownership has, and during the danger that follows, Flynn's understanding of Rapunzel changes as well. At first, she is an inconvenience attached to his missing prize. Now she becomes capable, resourceful, far stranger than he expected, certainly, but no longer someone he can dismiss as a naive obstacle. Rapunzel's view of Flynn changes too. She begins to see that the exaggerated confidence is not the entire person. Then the story traps them in a situation where performance becomes useless. With escape appearing impossible, Flynn can no longer solve the problem through charm. Rapunzel cannot solve it through optimism alone. Fear strips them down, and Rapunzel finally reveals the secret Flynn could never have guessed. Her hair is not simply unusually long, it carries magic. That revelation is important, not because Flynn learns a fantasy fact, but because Rapunzel voluntarily shares something Gothel has taught her must remain hidden. Trust is beginning to replace isolation. When the magic becomes visible to Flynn, he does not respond by treating Rapunzel as Gothel's. He does not immediately reduce her to what the power can give him. And for Rapunzel, that difference matters. After they escape, the journey becomes quieter. The film allows the two characters to stop reacting to danger and actually begin seeing each other. Flynn's identity starts opening fast. The name, the swagger, the wanted poster image, those things belong to the person he decided to become. Underneath Flynn Rider is Eugene Fitzherbert. The reveal is not powerful because Eugene's original identity contains some enormous secret. It matters because he has spent years treating the invented version as more valuable than the real one. Now put Eugene beside Rapunzel. One character has escaped into a false identity. The other has been imprisoned inside one. Eugene made himself into Flynn because he believed that persona could give him the life he wanted. Rapunzel has been taught that she is simply Gothel's protected daughter, a girl too vulnerable for the world beyond the tower. Both identities offer protection, neither offers honesty. That is why the connection begins strengthening when the performances weaken. But Gothel understands Rapunzel's psychology better than anyone. She knows that dragging Rapunzel back by force would not be enough. Rapunzel needs to believe that leaving was a mistake, so the conflict escalates through doubt. Gothel is the exact place where Rapunzel is emotionally vulnerable, the fear that Eugene does not truly care about her. This is manipulation built from years of preparation. If Rapunzel believes she cannot trust herself, then every disappointment becomes evidence that Gothel was right, and that makes the lanterns even more important. Because Rapunzel keeps moving toward them anyway, when she finally reaches the kingdom, the one she has imagined from a tower window becomes tangible. There are streets, people, music, movement, symbols she does not yet fully understand, and everywhere Rapunzel encounters life that seems strangely capable of making room for her. The most important detail is not that she instantly recognizes where she belongs. She does not. The important detail is that she feels something before she understands it. The kingdom contains an image connected to the missing princess, sun-like royal emblem repeated throughout the environment. Rapunzel has seen that shape before without realizing its significance. The story is quietly placing pieces around her, a symbol from the kingdom. Images buried within Rapunzel's own creativity, a birthday, a yearly ritual of lanterns, a missing child, a girl whose past has been controlled so completely that she does not know what memories belong to her. The connection has not fully clicked yet, but the evidence is accumulating. Then comes the boat. For most of her life, the lanterns have been distant points beyond Rapunzel's reach. Now she is sitting beneath them, and the emotional question unexpectedly changes. Rapunzel thought reaching the lights would solve something. Instead, achieving the dream frightens her in a new way. What happens after the thing you have wanted your entire life finally happens? Eugene gives her an answer without pretending that dreams are disposable. You can choose another one. That idea is enormous for Rapunzel because Gothel's world is built on limitation. Stay here. Believe this. Fear that. Do not ask for more. But Eugene introduces another possibility. Life does not have to shrink after a dream is fulfilled. It can expand. And this is also where Eugene makes his most important choice so far. The stolen treasure that once drove his story becomes less important than the person sitting in front of him. Rapunzel, meanwhile, is no longer simply using Eugene as transportation to the lanterns. The transaction has become trust. That transformation makes what follows more painful. Gothel's manipulation attacks precisely that trust, creating circumstances that make Rapunzel believe the outside world has confirmed her worst fears. From Rapunzel's perspective, the experiment appears to have failed. She trusted. She left. She loved something outside the tower. And now she has been hurt. So returning with Gothel does not simply mean returning to a location. It means returning to the old explanation of reality. Gothel wants Rapunzel to interpret everything that happened as proof that independence was foolish. But there is one problem. Rapunzel has now seen too much. The tower can contain her body again. It cannot restore her ignorance. The people she met were real. The courage she discovered was real. The lanterns were real. Eugene's vulnerability was real. And the strange symbols scattered across her experience are still there, waiting to connect. Back inside the tower, Rapunzel looks at the images around her with different eyes. The sun motif that has followed her without explanation no longer feels decorative. The annual lanterns no longer feel random. Her birthday no longer feels disconnected from the kingdom's grief. One detail reaches another, then another. The story's clue trail finally turns inward. Rapunzel begins to understand that the most important thing stolen from her was never her freedom of movement. It was the truth about who she was. The magical hair gave Gothel a reason to take Rapunzel. Fear gave Gothel a way to keep her. But experience has now given Rapunzel something Gothel cannot easily remove. Perspective. She can compare the world she was told about with the world she actually encountered. She can compare Gothel's definition of love with the trust she experienced elsewhere. She can compare the identity assigned to her with the evidence of another life waiting beneath it. And once Rapunzel starts trusting what she sees, the tower loses the most important part of its power. Its walls are still standing. Gothel is still dangerous. The conflict is not finished. But Rapunzel is no longer the same person who first looked through that window. The girl who left the tower wanted to see some lights. The person who returns understands that the journey was actually teaching her how to see herself. And this is the moment the box opens completely. Once the box is fully open, the reason Tangled works becomes much easier to identify. The film is funny, beautiful, fast, romantic, and technically polished. But none of those qualities would matter as much if Rapunzel did not feel emotionally believable. Mandy gives the character an unusual balance of innocence and intelligence. Rapunzel knows very little about the outside world, but the film never confuses inexperience with stupidity. She observes quickly, she adapts, she asks questions. And when circumstances force her to act, she usually discovers that she is far more capable than Gothel taught her to believe. One of the strongest examples comes after Rapunzel first leaves the tower. The comedy of her emotional swings is memorable, but most performance gives those changes an underlying truth. Rapunzel can be thrilled by freedom and terrified by it almost simultaneously. That contradiction could have made her seem inconsistent. Instead, it makes her human. She has spent 18 years absorbing one version of reality. Of course, one afternoon outside cannot erase it. And opposite her, Zachary Levi makes Flynn Rider work because the performance understands that confidence is part of the costume. Flynn enters scenes expecting charm to solve everything. His voice carries that certainty. He speaks like somebody who has already decided how everyone else will react to him. Then Rapunzel refuses to behave according to his expectations. Maximus refuses to. Almost everybody does. The more the movie damages Flynn's carefully constructed image, the more interesting Eugene becomes. That transition reaches its strongest point when the two characters finally stop treating each other as roles. She is no longer merely the strange girl with impossible hair. He is no longer merely the arrogant thief. They start revealing the people underneath. And this is where Tangled does something structurally clever. Its romance is not built around instant perfection. It is built around information. Each character learns something that changes the way the other is understood. Rapunzel sees weakness underneath Flynn's swagger. Eugene sees courage underneath Rapunzel's sheltered upbringing. Their attraction grows alongside recognition. That is why the relationship feels earned even though the movie moves quickly. The story construction is equally strong because nearly every important external element reflects Rapunzel's internal conflict. The tower represents the safety she has been taught to accept. The road represents uncertainty. The lanterns represent the unanswered truth pulling her forward. Her hair represents the gift that has been turned into a mechanism of control. Gothel represents fear presented as protection. Eugene gradually represents something different, a relationship in which Rapunzel can make choices without having to earn permission for them. Nothing exists only because the plot needs another obstacle. The strongest pieces are doing emotional work at the same time. That is efficient storytelling. The direction also deserves credit for allowing sincerity to survive the comedy. Tangled has plenty of jokes. Maximus pursuing Flynn with almost personal outrage could have belonged to a much broader cartoon. Pascal communicates entire arguments without speaking. The snuggly duckling deliberately fits threatening character designs into comic vulnerability. Yet the film does not become embarrassed when it needs to be romantic or painful. That balance is difficult. Too much comedy and the emotional scenes stop carrying weight. Too much seriousness and the adventure loses its buoyancy. Tangled keeps moving between both without making them feel like separate movies. Visually, the lantern sequence is the clearest example of the film, knowing exactly when to stop performing and simply let an emotion land. The spectacle is enormous, but the scene feels intimate. That is the contradiction that makes it exceptional. Thousands of lights occupy the sky, yet our attention keeps returning to two people sitting quietly in a small boat. The scale around them grows while the emotional focus narrows. And because Rapunzel has spent the entire film chasing those lights, the scene gives us something more powerful than beauty. It gives us arrival, the music and sound design strengthen that feeling. Alan Menken's score and songs help maintain the fairy tale identity of the film, but the music is most effective when it reveals what characters cannot yet say plainly. Rapunzel's early music turns repetition into yearning. Gotha's musical presence turns affection into performance. And during the lantern sequence, the music allows the emotional relationship between Rapunzel and Eugene to become clearer without needing the film to force the moment through exposition. Sound also helps define the world beyond the tower. Rapunzel's isolated environment gives way to crowds, hooves, tavern chaos, water, movement, and the constant noise of other lives. The outside world sounds busy because it is busy. Freedom is not silent, it is full of interruption. And if I had to choose the one sequence that completely captures why Tangled works, it would still be the lantern scene. Not simply because it is beautiful. Beauty alone would not be enough. It was because every major emotional mechanism reaches the same point at once. Rapunzel finally sees the things she has dreamed about. Eugene finally stops treating his own desires as the center of every decision. The kingdom's belief is unknowingly surrounding the person it has been grieving. And the golden light that once represented the power keeping Rapunzel trapped now surrounds her without demanding anything from her. That last detail matters most. For years, Rapunzel's glow has been valuable because somebody else needs it. The lanterns ask nothing, they simply rise. For perhaps the first time in her life, Rapunzel is surrounded by something magical that does not require her to be useful. That is why the scene feels like more than a romantic spectacle. It is a film briefly showing Rapunzel what love without possession might feel like. And once Tangled reaches that emotional height, its weaknesses become easier to notice too. Because for everything the movie does brilliantly, there are places where the box contains compartments that could have been opened further. The biggest weakness in Tangled is not that any major piece completely fails. It is that a few important pieces are much thinner than the rest. Mother Gothel is the clearest example. As a presence, she works extremely well. She is theatrical, manipulative, funny, cruel, and immediately recognizable. Her relationship with Rapunzel gives the film some of its darkest emotional material, but the character herself does not develop very far beyond the mechanism she represents. We understand what she wants. She wants continued access to Rapunzel's magical hair and the youth it preserves for her. We understand how she gets it. Isolation, fear, emotional manipulation. What we do not get is much complexity beyond that need, and in one sense, the simplicity is effective. Gothel functions almost like a perfect embodiment of possessive love. But because Rapunzel's psychology is surprisingly layered, Gothel can sometimes feel less dimensional by comparison. The same issue appears with some of the supporting characters. The Stabbington brothers are useful because they create external pressure and give Gothel people she can manipulate, but they are primarily plot tools. They do not add much emotionally beyond escalating the danger surrounding Eugene and Rapunzel. That becomes noticeable because the film is so good at giving personality to characters who barely speak. Maximus has almost no dialogue and yet feels completely specific. Pascal can communicate loyalty, irritation, suspicion, and affection through movement alone. So when humans supporting antagonists feel comparatively functional, the gap becomes clearer. The pacing also becomes compressed near the end. For most of the movie, Rapunzel's emotional development is allowed to happen through accumulated experience. She leaves the tower, she meets people, she tests Gothel's warnings against reality, she learns to trust Eugene, she encounters the kingdom, she notices the symbols around her. That progression feels carefully built. But once the truth begins snapping into place, the story accelerates rapidly toward confrontation. It works dramatically, but I would have welcomed a little more time with Rapunzel processing what the revelation actually means. Imagine discovering that nearly your entire understanding of childhood, family, safety, and identity was constructed around a lie. That is enormous. The film gives the realization emotional force, but then the plot immediately needs movement. The fairy tale engine takes over. For younger audiences and for the momentum of the adventure, that choice makes sense. For the deeper emotional story, it leaves something unexplored. There is also a slight imbalance in how thoroughly the film develops Rapunzel compared with Eugene. Eugene has a strong arc. His Flynn Rider identity is revealed as a performance, and his relationship with Rapunzel gradually pushes him toward honesty and selflessness. But we only get glimpses of the experiences that created that persona. That is enough for the movie to function. Still, another layer of his past could have made his transformation even stronger. Why does he believe an invented identity is more valuable than Eugene Fitzherbert? We get an answer, but we do not spend much time living inside it. The film prefers forward motion. Usually, that is one of its strengths. Here, it becomes a small limitation. And then there is the comedy. Most of it works. Some of it works brilliantly. But there are moments when the movie's need to keep the energy light slightly reduces the tension around serious emotional material. Tangled is constantly balancing two films. One is a playful animated adventure. The other is a story about a young woman realizing that the person she trusted most has systematically shaped her fear for selfish reasons. Those tones coexist much better than they have any right to, but not perfectly. Occasionally, you can feel the film stepping away from emotional discomfort sooner than the subject deserves. None of these weaknesses destroy the experience for me. That is important. They keep Tangled from becoming quite as psychologically rich as its best ideas suggest it could be. But they do not weaken the central emotional journey. The structure remains strong. Rapunzel remains compelling. Eugene remains charming once the charm becomes honest. Gothel remains effective even when she is not especially complex. And the lantern sequence still lands because the movie earns it. So the flaws feel more like unopened compartments than broken ones. There are places where the film could have gone deeper. It simply chooses speed, accessibility, and fairy tale clarity instead. And that trait becomes especially interesting when we put Tangled beside other animated films built around princesses' identity, freedom, and the question of what happens when someone finally steps outside the life chosen for them. Put Tangled beside other Disney films about identity and freedom, and its particular strength becomes easier to see. Start with The Little Mermaid. Ariel and Rapunzel are both young women whose curiosity pulls them toward a world they have been told not to enter. Both stories involve parental authority, rebellion, romance, and the desire to experience something beyond the boundaries of home, but the emotional mechanism is different. Ariel knows where she comes from. Her conflict is about where she wants to go. Rapunzel does not even know that the identity she has been given is false. That makes Tango less about rejecting one word for another and more about discovering that the boundaries of your world were deliberately constructed. Then compare it with Frozen. Both films understand that love is more complicated than romantic destiny, but Frozen pushes that idea towards sisterhood, while Tangled examines the difference between love and possession. Gothel repeatedly presents control as care. That gives Tangled a sharper villain relationship than many Disney princess films because the danger is emotionally intimate. Rapunzel is not simply running from someone evil. She is learning that someone she loves has been using love itself as a tool. Now place the film next to Moana. This comparison reveals one place where Tangled falls slightly short. Moana's journey outward is tied strongly to her community, ancestry, responsibility, and the future of her people. Rapunzel's journey is more personal. That gives Tangled intimacy, but it also means the kingdom outside Rapunzel's immediate emotional story is not explored very deeply. We feel what the lanterns mean, we understand the grief behind them, but the larger social world remains mostly a beautiful destination rather than a fully developed community. And then there is Beauty and the Beast. Both films pair romance with characters who initially misunderstand one another, but Tangled gives its central relationship a much lighter rhythm. Rapunzel and Eugene become close by traveling together. Movement creates intimacy. Each obstacle forces them to reveal information. That makes the romance feel less like two characters learning to coexist inside one enclosed location and more like two identities being gradually dismantled on the road. What does Tangle do that these comparisons highlight best? It makes liberation feel psychologically messy. Rapunzel does not leave the tower and instantly become empowered. She doubts herself, feels guilty, gets frightened, makes mistakes, then keeps moving. That is the detail I think gives the film its staying power. Freedom is not presented as a switch, it is presented as something you practice. If you love Tangled because of its adventurous heroine and emotional musical storytelling, Moana is an easy next choice. If the relationship between manipulation and genuine love interested you most, Frozen offers another Disney story that questions the assumption that romance must automatically be the deepest bond in the room. And if you want another classic Disney heroine whose desire for a larger life drives the story, The Little Mermaid makes a fascinating companion piece because the similarities reveal just how differently Disney's idea of a princess evolved. But if Tangled did not connect with you because the comedy, musical structure, or fairy tale simplicity felt too light, I would move outside the princess formula completely and try something like How to Train Your Dragon. It shares the idea of a young person discovering that the world they were taught to fear is more complicated than they were told. But its emotional atmosphere is less romantic and more focused on prejudice, responsibility, and changing a community. That comparison tells us something important. Tango did not reinvent the fairy tale by throwing its ingredients away. It rearranged them. The princess still dreams, the thief still becomes heroic, the villain still wants control, the kingdom still waits, but the emotional center has shifted from rescue to self recognition. And that shift makes even more sense when we look at the cultural moment in which Tangled arrived, when Disney itself was trying to work out what a modern fairy tale should look like. When Tangled arrived in November 2010, Disney Animation was standing in an interesting place. The studio had decades of fairy tale history behind it, but computer animation had changed what theatrical animation looked like. Pixar had become one of the dominant names in the medium, while studios outside Disney were producing increasingly successful CG films of their own. So Tangled was not merely releasing another princess story. It was testing whether the classical Disney musical fairy tale could still feel central to modern animation, rather than like a nostalgic return to something audiences had moved beyond. Looking backward makes that moment even clearer. The Walt Disney Company itself later described Tangled as the beginning of a run of major critical and commercial successes for Walt Disney Animation Studios that continued through films such as Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Big Hero 6 and Zootopia. That does not mean one film magically rebuilt the studio, but Tangled feels like an important bridge. It takes ingredients associated with traditional Disney royalty, romance, songs, magic, and expressive villain, animal companions and delivers them through the pacing, comic timing, CG filmmaking, and character behavior of a newer era. Even the title reflects that balancing act. The movie is based on Rapunzel, yet it presents itself as an adventure belonging to more than one character. Rapunzel is still unmistakably the emotional center, but Eugene is allowed enough narrative weight that the movie can operate simultaneously as princess story, buddy adventure, romantic comedy, and musical. Critics generally responded positively. Metacritic currently records a 71 Metascore from 34 critic reviews, with 30 of those reviews categorized as positive and none as negative. Rotten Tomatoes currently lists the film at 89% on its tomatometer. What is interesting is that there is not some dramatic critic versus audience war surrounding Tangled. Metacritic's current user score is 8.1, substantially enthusiastic alongside the already favorable professional response that fits the film. Tangled is not primarily the kind of movie that became beloved years later because critics completely misunderstood it on release. The affection was already there. What has changed is the context around it. In 2010, it could look like Disney successfully modernizing an old formula. After Frozen, Moana, and the larger revival of Walt Disney animation that followed, Tangled looks more like one of the places where that new language was being established. The award story is revealing too. At the 83rd Academy Awards, Tangled received one nomination, Best Original Song for I See the Light, written by Alan Menken and Len Slater. It did not win. The Oscar went to We Belong Together from Toy Story 3. The film also received 2 Golden Globe nominations, including recognition in the animated feature film, and I See the Light later won the Grammy for Best Song, written for visual media at the 54th Grammy Awards. For me, the interesting omission is the Academy's animated feature category. Tangled was not nominated there. And considering how successfully the film balances character animation, musical storytelling, visual design, comedy, and emotional structure, that feel like the recognition it most deserved but did not receive. Because the lantern sequence is extraordinary, yes, but reducing the achievement of Tangled to one song misses how many mechanisms have to work together before that song can land. The animation earns it, the relationship earns it, the lighting earns it, Rapunzel's longing earns it, the entire structure earns it, and time has been unusually kind to the movie. Disney was still publicly celebrating Tangled for its 15th anniversary in 2025, and the company continues to describe it as one of its popular films. That suggests something important about whether the film feels timeless or locked to 2010. Some of its comic rhythm unmistakably belongs to the era of fast, self-aware CG animation. But its central emotion idea has aged better than any stylistic trend. A young person is told that fear is love. She eventually learns the difference. That does not belong to 2010. And perhaps that is why the movie keeps finding new generations. The technology have modernized the fairy tale. The emotional mechanism kept it alive. But once a film survives long enough, people begin looking beneath even that mechanism. They begin asking whether seemingly innocent details mean more than the story openly admits. And around Tangled, a few interpretations have become especially persistent. Once people start connecting the symbols inside Tangled, it becomes tempting to connect the film to everything around it. Some theories are surprisingly interesting. Others collapse the moment you ask the movie itself to provide evidence. One of the most persistent claims is that Mother Gothel and the evil queen from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs might somehow be the same character. Fans point to their obsession with preserving beauty, their knowledge of magic, their aging appearances, and even certain visual similarities. The theory has circulated widely enough to become one of the better known Disney crossover ideas. It is fun, But Tangled itself gives us no real reason to accept it. Gothel's relationship with Eugene is explained by the magical flower and later Rapunzel's hair. The film does not suggest that she possesses the evil queen's history, identity, or magical methods. Similar obsession is not evidence of shared identity. If anything, the comparison works better thematically. Both villains fear losing the thing on which they have built their sense of value. For the evil queen, beauty becomes competition. For Gothel, youth becomes survival. That parallel is interesting without needing the characters to literally be one person. A second theory connects Tangled with Frozen. Rapunzel and Eugene appear as background guests during Elsa's coronation, an Easter egg that encouraged fans to construct a much larger shared world explanation. One popular version claimed that Anna and Elsa's parents had been traveling toward Rapunzel and Eugene's wedding when their voyage ended disastrously. The idea became famous enough that Mandy was later asked about it and dismissed the supposed connection as an unsupported fan construction. The cameo is real. The elaborate explanation is not established by Tangled, and this distinction matters whenever we talk about fan theories. An Easter egg proves that filmmakers place something recognizable in a flame. It does not automatically turn every surrounding speculation into canon. Then we reach a theory that the movie itself makes much more interesting. Does Rapunzel completely lose the flower's magic when Eugene cuts her hair? At first, the film seems to say yes. The golden hair turns brown, and the property Gothel has spent years exploiting disappears. But then Rapunzel's tear falls onto Eugene, and the magical healing force manifests again. That moment has led fans to argue that the power was never located exclusively in Rapunzel's hair at all. Unlike the crossover theories, this interpretation actually has evidence inside the film. But the safest reading is narrower than some fan explanations make it. The movie demonstrates that the flower's magic can still express itself through Rapunzel after her hair is cut. It does not establish a complete biological rulebook explaining every possible way that power operates, and emotionally, that ambiguity is perfect. Because if Rapunzel's power exists beyond the hair, our original clue changes one final time. Gothel spent years confusing Rapunzel with the thing growing from her head. She valued the hair, protected the hair, needed the hair, and because Rapunzel possessed it, Gothel treated possession of Rapunzel as necessary too. But the ending suggests something Gothel never truly understood. Rapunzel was never reducible to the feature Gothel found useful. That is why the strongest theory surrounding Tangled is not really a conspiracy at all. It is an interpretation. The magic surviving beyond the golden hair mirrors Rapunzel surviving beyond the identity imposed on her. Remove the thing everyone used to define her, and Rapunzel is still Rapunzel, perhaps even more completely than before, and that takes us away from interconnected Disney universes and hidden genealogies toward the question the film itself actually wants us to ask. If Rapunzel's story is not ultimately about magical hair, what is it really about? That is the compartment underneath everything else. Underneath the songs, the comedy, the chase scenes, the romance, and the fairy tale machinery, Tangled is really about learning to trust your own perception after somebody else has spent years teaching you not to. That is the deeper layer. Rapunzel's problem is not simply captivity. If it were, the story would become much easier the moment she stepped outside the tower. But the film makes sure that does not happen. She leaves. And Gothel's voice lives with her. That is why Rapunzel can stand in the middle of freedom and still feel guilty. The tower has become internal. Its walls have turned into beliefs. The outside world is dangerous. She is too inexperienced. She will fail. She will be rejected. The person controlling her supposedly knows better. Those ideas matter because they reveal what Gothel has actually taken from Rapunzel. Not only years, not only family, not only freedom. She has interfered with Rapunzel's ability to interpret her own feelings. Whenever Rapunzel wants something, she has been trained to ask whether wanting it is wrong. Whenever she senses something is missing, Gothel offers another explanation. Whenever Rapunzel moves toward independence, fear is introduced as evidence that she should stop. And that is why the floating lanterns are so powerful. They are one of the only desires Rapunzel has that does not originate inside Gothel's system. Gothel did not give her that dream. She cannot explain it away. She cannot make Rapunzel stop noticing the strange connection. Every year the lanterns return. Every year something inside Rapunzel responds. They become a kind of emotional memory before they become a factual one. Rapunzel does not remember the kingdom consciously. But something in her recognizes that those lights matter. That is what makes the symbol beautiful. The lanterns represent truth arriving before language. Sometimes you know something in your life is wrong long before you know how to explain why. Sometimes you feel drawn toward a different possibility before you can defend that feeling logically. And sometimes the first step toward changing your life is simply accepting that the feeling deserves to be investigated. Rapunzel does that. She does not have evidence at the beginning. She has curiosity. That curiosity becomes movement. Movement creates experience. Experience creates comparison. And comparison eventually destroys the lie. That is the mechanism of the entire movie. Gothel can control Rapunzel only while Gothel remains the primary source of information about the world. The moment Rapunzel begins collecting her own evidence, the structure starts collapsing. The supposedly terrifying strangers at the snuggly duckling turn out to contain kindness and dreams. Eugene, whom Rapunzel has every reason to distrust initially, slowly demonstrates vulnerability and loyalty. The kingdom does not feel like the hostile place she was taught to expect. Even Rapunzel herself behaves differently from the helpless person Gothel described. Every experience produces a contradiction, and contradictions are dangerous to controlling stories. Because eventually Rapunzel has to choose which version of reality she believes. That is why Gothel's most important weapon is not physical strength, it is interpretation. She repeatedly tries to tell Rapunzel what events mean. Danger means you should stay home. Fear means you are not ready. Attraction means you are being foolish. Pain means you should never have trusted anyone. Gotha's power depends on reaching the conclusion before Rapunzel can. Eugene's relationship with Rapunzel works in almost the opposite way. He begins as someone who tries to manipulate situations too, but as the relationship deepens, he increasingly gives Rapunzel room to choose. He does not create the lantern dream, he helps her reach it. He does not assign her a new identity, he begins revealing his own. That difference is enormous. Healthy connection in Tangled is not shown as somebody telling you who to become. It is shown as somebody making it safer for you to become more honest about who you already are. And Eugene needs that lesson too. His deeper conflict mirrors Rapunzel's in a quieter way. He has built Flynn Rider as an identity because Eugene Fitzherbert did not feel sufficient. The Confident Outlaw is a story he tells the world. Rapunzel is living inside a story somebody else told her. Eugene is living inside one he told himself. Both characters therefore spend the film confusing survival strategies with identity. Rapunzel's survival strategy is obedience. Eugene's is performance. And both begin changing when those strategies stop being necessary between them. This is why names matter in the film. Rapunzel's real identity has been hidden from her. Eugene's real name has been hidden by him. The more honest the relationship becomes, the less useful the false identities are. And then there is the hair. From the beginning, everybody notices it. That is understandable. It is visually impossible not to. But symbolically, the hair represents the dangerous idea that your value can become attached to the thing you provide for other people. Gothel not truly value Rapunzel as a complete person. She values what Rapunzel's power can do. That makes the affection conditional even when it sounds maternal. Rapunzel is safe as long as the source of Gotha's youth is safe. The tower therefore protects the resource before it protects the person. That is why the eventual loss of the golden hair means so much. On the surface, it looks like Rapunzel has lost the extraordinary thing that defined her. But emotionally, the opposite happens. For the first time, she becomes impossible for Gothel to use in the same way. The thing that made Rapunzel valuable to her captor disappears. Rapunzel remains. And that is one of the cleanest symbolic statements the movie makes. Your usefulness to another person is not the same thing as your worth. Gothel cannot understand that distinction. Eugene eventually can. He values Rapunzel even when protecting her means losing the magic entirely. That choice exposes the difference between possession and love more clearly than any speech could. Possession asks, "What can I keep?" Love asks, "What does the other person need?" Gothel keeps Rapunzel alive so she can continue taking something from her. Eugene is willing to sacrifice what could save him so that Rapunzel cannot be controlled through it anymore. Two relationships, same magical hair, completely opposite meanings. And now our original clue finally opens all the way. The golden hair was never the real source of Rapunzel's identity. It was simply the feature around which everyone else built their assumptions. Gothel saw youth. The kingdom would eventually see proof of the missing princess. Eugene first saw something impossible. But Rapunzel's actual journey is about learning to look past all of those external definitions. That is why the lanterns and the hair form such a perfect visual pair. The hair shines from Rapunzel outward. The lanterns shine from the world back toward her. One has been demanded from her. The other has been waiting for her. One represents what she can provide. The other represents where she belongs. And by the time Rapunzel understands the difference, the film is no longer asking whether she is brave enough to leave a tower. It is asking something much closer to real life. What happens when the story you were taught about yourself stops matching the evidence of who you are becoming? At some point, you have to decide. Do you retreat into the familiar story because it feels safer? Or do you accept the frightening possibility that your life might be larger than the person who controlled it ever allowed you to imagine? Rapunzel chooses the larger life, not because fear disappears, not because everything becomes certain, but because she finally learns that uncertainty does not automatically mean she is wrong. And that might be the most human idea inside the entire fairy tale. Freedom is not the absence of fear. Sometimes freedom is recognizing that fear no longer deserves the final vote. From here, only one question remains before we enter the spoilers completely. What did Tangled leave behind? Because a fairy tale can end when the tower falls. A film's influence begins afterward. The legacy of Tangled becomes clearer when we resist the temptation to claim that it single-handedly changed Disney animation. It did not, but it arrived at exactly the right moment to prove that something important could work again. Disney could take the architecture of its classic fairy tale musicals, build it with modern computer animation, faster comedy, more conversational characters, and contemporary emotional psychology, and still make the result feel sincere. The company itself later connected Tangled to the momentum that followed. Disney's 2012 annual report described Wreck-It Ralph as building on the success of Tangled, while later company material placed Tangled at the beginning of the run that included Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Big Hero 6, and Zootopia. That is probably the fairest way to understand its historical position, not as the movie that invented Disney's next era, as one of the movies that helped make that era possible. And technically, Tangled left evidence of its ambition behind as well. Rapunzel's 70 feet of hair required specialized simulation and rendering work. Disney Animation later published technical material describing methods developed around controlling its movement, shading, illumination, and the enormous challenge of making something so physically complicated remain artistically readable. That matters because the hair was never merely a technical showcase. The technology disappeared into character. You remember Rapunzel pulling, swinging, wrapping, dragging, healing, and living with that hair. You do not watch the film thinking about simulation equations. That is successful animation technology, complexity underneath, emotion on top. The story also proved durable enough that Disney did not simply leave Rapunzel at the end of the feature. Tangled Ever After followed theatrically in 2012, and in 2017, Tangled Before Ever After and Tangled. The series expanded the period between the original film and Rapunzel and Eugene's later marriage. The television story deliberately explored Rapunzel adjusting to her parents' corona and a royal identity she had never been prepared to inhabit. That continuation is fascinating because it opens exactly the compartment the movie necessarily closes quickly. Escaping a tower is one thing, building a life afterward is another. The original film ends with belonging restored, but the expanded story recognizes that discovering who you are does not instantly teach you how to live as that person. And Tangled has remained visible far beyond those immediate sequels. When Tokyo Disney Sea opened Fantasy Springs in 2024, Tangled received Rapunzel's Forest and the Rapunzel's Lantern Festival attraction. Disney described the movie at the time as one of its most popular films. 14 years after release, the lanterns were still the image chosen to transform into a physical experience. That tell you something about what survived. Not the chase, not the stolen crown, not even the magical hair by itself. The lanterns, the moment when longing becomes belonging. And that brings the legacy directly back to our clue. At the beginning of Tangled, Rapunzel is visually defined by something inherited that another person controls. By the end, what people remember more strongly is an image connected to the choice she made for herself. That may be the film's most lasting achievement. It helped show that a Disney princess could still inhabit castles, songs, romance, magic, and fairy tale imagery while her central victory was not being rescued into somebody else's story. It was recognizing her own. Its reputation has not needed a dramatic rehabilitation because Tangled was already warmly received. What time has done instead is reveal its position more clearly. We now know what came after it, and from that distance, Tangled looks less like an isolated return to the Disney fairy tale and more like one of the hinges between two eras. The old box remained. The studio simply discovered another way to open it, and now there is only one compartment left before the verdict. No more avoiding the ending, no more protecting the twists. Because the final connection between the hair, the lanterns, Eugene's choice, Rapunzel's tear, and the tower can only be completed with the entire story exposed. Alright, full spoilers from this point. If you haven't seen the film yet, close this now, go watch it, and come back when you're ready. Trust me, you'll want to experience it fresh. The final section of Tangled begins with a truth Rapunzel has almost assembled without realizing it. The floating lanterns are not random. The sun symbols she has been unconsciously painting are not random. Her birthday is not random. And the missing princess whose parents release thousands of lanterns every year is not some distant story. She is Rapunzel. That revelation completes the clue trail we have been following since the beginning. Rapunzel has spent her life surrounded by evidence of who she really is, but Gothel controls the explanation attached to that evidence. That is the essential mechanism. Gothel could not erase Rapunzel's identity completely. She could only prevent Rapunzel from connecting the pieces. The moment Rapunzel finds it as that for herself, the tower changes meaning. At the beginning, it was home. Then it became something she wanted permission to leave. Now she understands it as the physical structure built around a stolen life. And for the first time, Rapunzel confronts Gothel not as a frightened daughter seeking approval, but as someone who recognizes the manipulation. That change matters more than any physical escape. The tower loses its psychological power before Rapunzel actually gets out. But Gothel still has one final source of leverage: Eugene. Gothel's plan has already made Rapunzel believe Eugene abandoned her, while Eugene has been captured after being framed and separated from Rapunzel. When he finally escapes with help from the people Rapunzel met earlier, the story quietly pays off one of its most important ideas. The outside world that Gothel described as dangerous becomes a world that helps Rapunzel. The supposedly frightening strangers are part of Eugene's rescue. Maximus, once his relentless pursuer, becomes his ally. Every connection Rapunzel and Eugene formed outside the tower comes back with consequences. That is not accidental. Gothel's system depends on isolation. The heroes survive because isolation has been broken. Eugene reaches the tower and discovers Rapunzel restrained by Gothel. And then Tangle makes the choice that defines Eugene's entire character arc. Rapunzel offers to surrender her freedom permanently if she can use the magic in her hair to save him. Think about what that means. She has just discovered who she is. She has just understood that Kothal stole her life. And he is prepared to return to captivity because someone she loves may otherwise die. Gothel accepts because the bargain restores exactly what she wants: Rapunzel's power, Rapunzel's obedience. Rapunzel herself as something that can still be owned, but Eugene understands the trap. If Rapunzel hears him, Gothel wins, so he uses the last strength he has to cut Rapunzel's hair. It is one of the most important actions in the film because Eugene chooses Rapunzel's freedom over the thing that could save him, and instantly the gold disappears. The long magical hair turns brown. Gothel reaches for it and discovers that the power she built her entire existence around is gone. This is where our first clue reaches its finer form. The hair began as Rapunzel's defining feature, then it became the reason for her imprisonment. Then Rapunzel began using it by choice. And finally, Eugene destroys its usefulness to Gothel entirely. He does not cut it because Rapunzel is less valuable without magic. He cuts it because her life is more valuable than what the magic can provide. That difference is the entire film. Gothel treated Rapunzel as precious because of what she possessed. Eugene treats Rapunzel as precious even when removing that possession costs him everything. Without the magic maintaining Gothel's stolen youth, her age rapidly catches up with her. In the confusion, Pascal contributes to her losing her footing, and Gothel falls from the tower. The film does not linger on the moment. It does not need to. The important thing is not Gothel's destruction. It is the destruction of the relationship that gave her power. Rapunzel is free, but the victory immediately becomes painful because Eugene appears lost. And this is where the film introduces one final transformation of the magic. Rapunzel grieves over him. A tear falls, and the healing power associated with the magical flower manifests again. Eugene returns. Whether you interpret this as the magic having always existed within Rapunzel herself or simply as the flower's power finding one final expression, the symbolic meaning is stronger than the magical mechanics. Gothel believed the miracle belonged to the hair. The ending suggests the miracle was never that simple. Rapunzel's identity survives the loss of the feature everyone considered extraordinary. She does not need 70 feet of glowing gold to remain special. That is why the brown hair matters. Visually, she looks less like the impossible magical object Gothel wanted to preserve. Emotionally, she finally belongs entirely to herself. Then Rapunzel returns to the kingdom, and the reunion with her real parents gives the lanterns their final meaning. For years, Rapunzel looked at those lights as an unexplained dream. Her parents released them as an act of remembrance and hope. Neither side knew the other was responding. The lanterns therefore formed a connection before Rapunzel consciously understood that connection existed. They were never simply guiding her toward a place. They were guiding the story toward recognition. And once Rapunzel walks back into the life stolen from her, the lights are no longer a mystery. They are evidence that she was never forgotten. Eugene changes too. The man who began the movie obsessed with wealth, image, and the fantasy of an effortless life ends it having sacrificed the most valuable thing available to him because someone else's freedom mattered more. Flynn Rider was built around taking. Eugene becomes heroic when he learns to let go. That is why I think the ending lands so well. It does not merely reveal that Rapunzel is a princess. That twist is easy to predict. The emotional reveal is more important. Rapunzel does not become worthy because she discovers royal blood. She discovers royal blood after already proving that Gothel's definition of her was false. She had courage before she knew her name, compassion before she knew her family, agency before she knew her title. The clown confirms her history. It does not create her value. And that brings everything back to the golden strand with which we opened this box. A gift became a cage because somebody else claimed ownership of it. A tower became a home because fear controlled the meaning of the outside world. The lanterns became a dream because truth kept calling Rapunzel toward something she could feel before she could explain it. And freedom finally arrived when Rapunzel learned that she was more than the thing everyone else could see glowing. That is what Tangle ultimately reveals. The real magic was never simply the hair. It was Rapunzel becoming able to recognize her own life. After opening every compartment of Tangled, my rating stays exactly where it began, 8 out of 10. Not because the movie is flawless, Mother Gothel could have been explored with greater complexity. Eugene's history could have been given more room. The final act moves so quickly that Rapunzel barely has time to process the enormous truth about her childhood before the story races toward its confrontation. But those weaknesses never overpower what the movie understands exceptionally well. Tangled knows that freedom is more complicated than opening a door. Rapunzel spends years physically trapped in a tower, but the real prison is the belief system Gothel builds around her. That is why leaving does not instantly solve everything. Rapunzel carries fear, guilt, uncertainty, and Gothel's warnings into the outside world. What changes her is experience. She sees, she questions, she compares, and finally she trusts herself. That is what makes this fairy tale feel emotionally alive. Mandy Moore gives Rapunzel warmth, curiosity, vulnerability, and enough restless energy to make you believe this young woman has an entire life waiting to explode beyond those walls. Zachary Levi turns Flynn Rider's confidence into something more interesting by gradually revealing Eugene underneath it. Their romance works because they do not simply fall for attractive versions of each other. They begin discovering the people hidden behind those versions. And visually, Tangled still contains moments that feel genuinely magical. The lantern sequence remains the film's defining achievement for me because spectacle, music, character, symbolism, and emotion all arrive at the same place. The lights are beautiful, but beauty is not why they matter. They matter because Rapunzel has spent her life looking toward them without knowing they were created because somebody was still looking for her. That connection gives the entire image a heartbeat. If you love Disney musicals, fairy tale adventures, romantic animation, or stories about characters discovering who they are outside the identities imposed on them, Tangled is absolutely worth your time. If musical storytelling does not work for you, or if you prefer animated films with heavier world building and more morally complicated antagonists, Hearts of the Fear may feel too light or too familiar. But even then, there is craftsmanship here that is difficult to dismiss. For a first watch today, streaming is perfectly suited to it. But if Tangled already means something to you, this is also one of those Disney films worth owning and returning to. Because the emotional details become clearer once you stop watching only for the adventure. And if you ever get the opportunity to experience those lanterns on a large theatrical screen, take it. Because some images are designed to fill your field of vision. B began with a strand of golden hair, something beautiful that became a lock on a door. By the end, that hair is gone. Rapunzel remains. And maybe that is the simplest way to close this box. The thing people value in you is not necessarily the thing that defines you. Sometimes discovering who you are begins when you stop allowing somebody else to decide what your life is for. Every film is a box. And we open this one together. And with that, our Tangled box is officially closed. Thank you for staying with me through Rapunzel's tower, Eugene's carefully constructed identity, Gotha's manipulation, the floating lanterns, and all the little connections hiding underneath this deceptively simple fairy tale. If you enjoyed opening this film with me, leave a like and subscribe to the Film Box. It genuinely helps this channel keep digging beyond the surface and finding the details that make movies worth talking about long after the credits end, and I want to hear your interpretation. What do you think is the real moment Rapunzel becomes free when she leaves the tower? When she discovers the truth about her identity, or when her magical hair is finally cut? There is a strong argument for each answer, so tell me yours in the comments and explain why. Thank you for opening another film with me. Keep watching closely. Keep questioning what the story is showing you. And remember that sometimes the smallest clue is the one holding the entire movie together. Every film is a box, and we've only just started opening them. That's a film box. See you in the next one.